I'm giving a presentation about that it really is, we're showing a film about tomorrow, which is a much better presentation of all the things I'm going to talk about. So this is kind of a preview of the concepts and the ideas that film gets across in a much better way. And so this, I think, is a good primer for starting to understand the kind of breadth of the subject, which is a big topic. And then hopefully the film, hopefully you're all able to see it tomorrow. But our goal, the first film we made was called Gaza Fights for Freedom. You may have seen it, but I think that we made that film intending for it to be used mainly as an organizing tool, something that people active around Palestine can show people, organize events around, educate others, and we think that very much became that. And so the goal with this film, it was the same thing. It's like we want people to be able to take this and link the environmental movement with the anti-militarism movement, because it's imperative that that happens, because there is no way to do the changes we need to save the planet without linking it to the struggle against American imperialism. And so, yeah, the film, it's taken 5 years to make, which we did not anticipate, but it's because the topic was much bigger than we anticipated. And so it was kind of a journey going through the more and more things becoming important for the topic. So I'm just going to take you through briefly kind of what many of those things are, and then hopefully it encourages you to come see the film tomorrow. Go ahead. Okay, so one of the reasons that the US military is the biggest polluter on the planet, which has been said, and I'm sure you've all heard that quote, the US military is the biggest institutional polluter, it's because it's the biggest military ever, by a lot. And for example, the US Air Force is bigger than the next 6 biggest air forces combined in terms of aircraft. So that's a lot, that's pretty big. And then of course, in terms of bases, it is the only country that has a massive expanse of bases across the entire world. The only, over 1,000 bases. The only country that comes close is the UK with like a little over 100 bases, but the US uses all of those too, so they're technically US bases. The only adversaries that have overseas bases that don't let the US military use them is Russia with like 7, China with 1. And so it's really not a thing. Like nobody, like if you add up every other country's overseas bases, if you add them all up, the US, even the UK, the US still has like 10 times more than all the rest of the countries in the world overseas bases put together. So it's a strange thing. It's not a normal thing, and it's just kind of this unacknowledged reality of our society that we have this big expansive empire, but that empire comes at a huge cost to the planet for all of the reasons that I'm going to get into, and that's what we hope to get across in this film. Next slide. Okay, you can go to the next one. Okay, so these are kind of broad topics that I'll be getting into individually. There's emissions we've heard a bit about, toxic dumping, war fallout, habitat destruction, ocean disruption, and fossil fuel enforcement. So let's go to the next one. Okay, next slide. So, this idea that, we heard, in the first presentation also, we heard about how the Pentagon is like the biggest consumer of fossil fuels on the planet, which really, when you hear that, it's hard to picture what that really means. And even that it uses more than most countries. It works out to about 260,000 barrels of oil per day to make the US empire be able to function. And so that the emissions that are calculated from that, because the Pentagon doesn't calculate its own emissions, it just reports fuel use, and then you can extrapolate out how much carbon emissions that actually is. It makes it bigger than 140 countries. But that fact that you hear is based on that the US military is the biggest institutional polluter. That fact is from their official numbers. And so when you go much deeper, there is much more emissions that they are responsible for that go far beyond its official numbers. And so one of the things we do in the film is try to calculate actually what that is, and it turns out it's too vast to calculate, but it's big and a lot more than most people think, even within this world of understanding military pollution. And then the other thing is that some of you may know that these numbers of fuel consumption are exempt from international climate agreements. So when the US goes to Paris or to the COPs, when they say, oh, we're going to cut our emissions by 50% over the next 30 years, they're not counting their military emissions at all. And so it's just fake. And so this idea that, these climate negotiations are going to save the planet, and every other country does it too because the US did it on the basis of national security. So the idea that all these countries get together and say, guess what, we made a deal, we're going to cut emissions by this much, which is not enough to save the planet, but they come up with this number anyway and pat themselves on the back, the number's fake because they don't count the consumption of oil used for the military on the basis of national security, because if you know how much oil they use, you'll know that's intelligence that you can use to attack America. Continue. So that's a big topic that's kind of the first act in the film, is this whole issue. And so there's obviously a lot more to say about it, but that's just kind of the overview. Toxic dumping, go to the next one. Okay, so everywhere that I mentioned, there's a lot of bases. There's like around 600 in the United States and over 1,000 everywhere. Everywhere that there is a military base, there is contamination coming out of it. And that doesn't even count former military installations where there's storage of things like that. So it's really thousands and thousands of military sites that have a myriad of contaminants coming out of them. Like a lot, right? I mean, if you have a chemical company and there's contaminants from that chemical company, it's probably like one type of contamination. I know there's experts here on that, so you could correct DuPont guy, tell me if I'm wrong. But you're usually dealing with like some specific kinds of contamination. The types of contaminants that come from military bases are vast, and depending on where you are or what branch it is, it's different. And so when you kind of put them all together, there's really no comparison with an institution that puts so many contaminants into the environment. Pentagon calculates, this is what they report, because there's something called a toxic release inventory, so they report to another government body how much toxic waste they produce, 550,000 pounds per day, and then some of it they recycle, they manage a certain amount, which is storing it, packing it away, recycling it or whatever, but millions of pounds per year they can't do anything with, so they just dump it directly. They burn it, dump it in the ocean, dump it in the ground. It's a lot of stuff that just doesn't go away. Even if you try to clean it up, it's just there forever. No, you're okay. Go back. Go back one more. I want to make sure I don't forget. Back again. Spoiler alert. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and then I think as most, I think people are unaware that they're living in areas that are these kind of sacrifice zones, or that have a disproportionate health impact because of whatever contaminant they happen to live around. In the film tomorrow, you'll get to see what all these different contaminants are and the categories of them and what impacts they have. But I think for those of us who are oriented towards organizing, it is a big opportunity, because if you're near a military base, if you're active near a military base, there is probably some detrimental health impact that comes from living near it that is easily testable, because these test kits for all these different contaminants, you can just buy them and you can test the water yourself. And you can see if there's health disparities in your area just in terms of cancer numbers and things like that. It's a really incredible organizing opportunity to start to raise awareness about the fact that the military is kind of unaccountable. They have no transparency. They always do the wrong thing. So when they know that they're poisoning people, they just try to cover it up. And so time and time again, they've proved that even when they know they're responsible for contaminating people, they will do everything they can to cover it up and then fight the victims every step of the way in terms of getting any kind of compensation and of course, of cleaning it up. And there's a lot of, there's so many examples of this, but we don't have time to get into them. So let's go to the next slide. So war fallout, our first speaker spoke about this a little bit, and I think there's a really common misconception when it comes to fallout, right? I think most people would be familiar with birth defects and cancers in Iraq as a result of the US war on the country. And I think the most common idea about that is that it's from depleted uranium, which is radioactive and is highly toxic, and that the images of birth defects and things like that you see is a result of the use of DU on Iraq. In the film, we interview the top environmental toxicologist who studies Iraq and Afghanistan and the impact of the U.S. war. She said depleted uranium is not the issue. It is a issue, but it's not the issue. The issue is from the most basic munitions, from bullets. Because anytime you fire a bullet, blow up a grenade, launch a mortar round, launch an artillery round, it sends vaporized heavy metals into the environments that do not go away. They just stay in the soil, they stay in the water, they stay there forever, and they have extreme health impacts. And so, go to the next slide. So when you think about places that have tons of munitions dropped on them, it doesn't just kill people when the bomb goes off, but those heavy metals stay in the environments forever, and they make it into people's bodies. They cause congenital heart defects, cancers, and things of that nature. And so, there's, like Iraq, for example, like there's no safe place to live. And so this is what, when you think about climate change, reducing the number of places that we can live because sea level is rising or places get too hot, and people aren't going to be able to live in Las Vegas for too much longer. Sell your house if you got one in the next decade or so. But what about places where you can't live because there's contaminants from toxic waste from the military or from munitions, which don't just happen in war zones, right? Anywhere where the military is training, dropping munitions, shooting bullets, those heavy metals are staying those vaporized heavy metals are staying in the environment. Okay, next slide, because my time's running out. Okay, habitat loss, next slide. So we know that the US military has a lot of bases. They are still building more bases. They don't think they have enough, especially around China. So they're building lots and lots of new bases. And in places where they already occupy, places like Guam, places like Hawaii, they wanted to occupy more of it and use more of the land for military activities, which not only pollutes with the chemicals that come out of it, with the munitions that come out of it, but they destroy habitats to do it. And so one, of course, iconic example is in Okinawa, where there is a bay that's like 8 square miles, and it's one of the most biodiverse areas in the entire world. And the US is deciding to just landfill the entire bay. Yes, yeah, to landfill the entire, yes, but it's, as a vassal state. So they're landfilling the entire bay, which is home to 260 endangered species, just so they could build runways, just in case they want to go to war with China. Yeah, Jeju Island's another great example. And then, there's so many other places where just entire habitats are just used as bombing ranges, firing ranges. Guam is another great example of they use these like really important ancient forests to just shoot them up, and they start fires and things like that because they're just blowing them up. And that's just another example of the kind of recklessness of the U.S. military activities. And most militaries, when they do training, it's on a smaller scale because they're not huge. Next slide. Ocean disruption. Yeah, this is a sad one. So it turns out the U.S. Navy applies for permits every 5 years to kill mammals in the ocean because it's like this kind of rubber stamp on reckless military activities. You can go to the next slide. So the scale of this is kind of wild. Like the last permits that they got, which is just for the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean and just for training and testing, the U.S. Navy has a permit to harm 26 million marine mammals over that 5-year period, which the numbers are kind of staggering because, so in harming an animal, it means like disrupting them, harassing them, and sometimes killing them. So most aren't, it's not, we're saying 26 million marine mammals are being killed by the Navy every 5 years. But most of them are being disrupted where they can't feed, they can't navigate, and many of them die in ways that we can't be tracked, or populations are reduced in ways that can't be tracked by scientists. The only way we know they're dead is when their eardrums are blown out from sonars or they wash up on the beach because of military activity. Those are the only mammal deaths you can like directly attribute to the US Navy, but the impact is much broader. And when you think of some of these numbers, like the biggest one on that list is basically about like 5 million dolphins a year they're permitted to harm 5 million dolphins a year. There's like not that many dolphins. So basically every dolphin on Earth is being harmed by the Navy more than once in the course of a year is kind of how the numbers work out. So they have a really devastating impact, and that's just training and testing. That's just when they are blowing up munitions in the ocean to practice and to screw around. And then sonar is what they're doing when they're not training and testing, when they're out on the oceans, when they're doing their normal thing, which the US Navy is a global operation. It's in every body of water all over the Earth with the world's biggest Navy. And in fact, there's only, the US has like 9 aircraft carriers. The next, there's no other country that has more than 2, and there's like 1 country that has 2. And sonar kills marine mammals because it blows out their eardrums, and sonar pings out for hundreds of miles. And a lot of these like training exercises are just like in migration routes, right? I mean, they do them in Alaska, they do them in Hawaii, and whales travel from the spot where they do one to the other one, and so no matter where they are, they're getting hit with these training exercises by the Navy. So that's another very sad and kind of unrecognized aspect. Go to the next slide. And then, of course, Fossil fuel enforcement. I mean, we need to get off fossil fuels like yesterday. Entirely possible. You know, if the country did like a space race to get off of fossil fuels, we could be off fossil fuels in a few years in a very dramatic way. But why isn't that happening? Because we have a country that's run by corporations and the interests of the rich who don't want to get off fossil fuels because fossil fuels is big money, and they have a protection racket called the US military. And so as long as the US military acts as this barrier, not only in our own country, but how many governments have we seen overthrown around the world by the US military because they have energy independence, oil independence. They don't want to cooperate with American oil companies that can pillage the oil to whatever degree they want. And so the role that the US military plays as an enforcer of the fossil fuel industry globally and in our own country is something that shouldn't be ignored. You can go to the next one. And go to the next one again. I hope that there's a happy ending to the film. That kind of is. Everyone's like, you got to have like an optimistic ending. I don't feel super optimistic about the future, but I know I'm supposed to say I do. But it's a little scary. But I think that what I do feel good about is I think that more than ever, kind of consciousness has turned against war, against militarism. I think the war in Gaza has done a lot for people's views more broadly on these subjects, and people care about the climate, people care about the planet, and they care about the future. And there's an incredible opportunity to kind of link these two struggles. It's, like I said before, it's an essential thing. We have to do it if we're going to save the future. But I think there's more than ever an opening for this kind of thing to happen. And then just, you know, you can imagine the possibilities, right? I mean, right now, the role the US plays in the world as like an enforcer of this global order under their rule, they organize every country in the world and every military in the world that's like their quote-unquote friend to do a lot of bad stuff, right? They organize everyone for these big war games so they can practice attacking other countries. They organize everyone under a certain economic system that meets the needs of its capitalist class. But you know, if there is significant change in the United States, the U.S. could play a very different role in the world, where it organizes the world to get off fossil fuels and save the planet and have a more sustainable future. And so, you know, hopefully by linking these issues, we could get a step closer to that. Thank you.